about it from the participants. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's always an honor to give this annual shiur for a man who was both a very good friend, a very chashuv friend, Rabbi Mordechai, and who was always also a serious Talmud Chacham, and he lived his life as a Kiddush Hashem on so many different levels, ben odem l'chaveira, ben odem l'mokem, and he left behind bonim uvnei bonim, oskim b'Torah v'mitzvos. Sadly, he was taken from us much too soon, much too early. But every year we get together and at least remember Mordechai and his midas and his Yerushalayim and his love of learning and his love of Klal Yisrael, his Abbas Habrius. And I try to find a topic when I choose the topics for these shiurim, which would have spoken to him, which was important to him. And one of the subjects which I know was very important to him, and which I discussed with him on a few occasions, was to understand better what we are davening. That the Klal Yisrael Baruch Hashem daven regularly, quite a lot of us, but do we know what we're saying, and do we understand the significance of it, and the origin of it, and the makarot, and the deeper significance of some of the ideas and the words that we are saying in our tefillos? Let me see if I can just, one second, I think you have to get into participants, and then at the bottom it should say mute. Good. Good. Well done. Right.
I'll get that.
Whatever. Modern technology is. The question is, can they help him hear me? That's the question. We don't know how this works. Close. Right.
No, you're not muted, so you're fine.
Right. We are hoping that we've got the technology straight. And as I was saying, one of the issues that I wanted to do was to learn with you something from our tefillah, which has got particularly deep significance and deep power for Klal Yisrael, which we say as a matter of course. Most of our tefillahs we say, so to speak, on autopilot, without giving it too much thought. And Rav Mordechai was somebody who was upset about that, and very much tried very hard in his shiurim to bring in little insights into deeper meanings of the Kriya Shema, the Shemona Esrei, the Zimra, what we're saying and why we're saying it. And therefore I decided this evening to have a closer look at the Kaddish. Everybody should have a sheet. If you haven't got a sheet, there are sheets here, there are sheets on the beamer. Please come and take a sheet. We're going to be looking on the beamer. There should be some sheets. I appointed some monitors. Right. Because Josh, you could get fired as a monitor. You understand? Wouldn't be the first time. Okay. Okay, I'd like to take you through a few different levels of meaning in the Kaddish. But first of all, it's important to understand that we've all had experience learning Mishnah and learning Gemara, and the great care we take in looking at each word in the Mishnah and why the Mishnah uses this word and not that word, and why the Gemara chooses to ask this question or not that question. And it was Chachmei HaMishnah, it was the same people who wrote the Mishnah who wrote the Kaddish. Now, the Kaddish itself has origins from Chazal, and certainly deserves a closer attention. And you'd be amazed at the ideas that are contained within the Kaddish, which I hope to touch on a little bit this evening. I'd like to just take you through a couple of psukim first, just to give you a bit of an understanding when we're learning Siddur. When we're learning Siddur Be'iyun, as we're doing now, we're learning Kaddish Be'iyun. One of the important questions is, which parts of the Tanakh did Chazal have in front of their mind when they wrote the text of this tefillah? Because there's no question about it that Chazal sort of assume that all of us, when we're opening the Siddur and we're davening, we have in our minds the whole Tanakh. And of course we do, don't we, Rabbi Isa? We have the whole Tanakh, we know every word in the Tanakh, and when they quote a certain phrase or a certain pasuk, it evokes a connection to a particular part of the history of Klal Yisrael and the ideas expressed in the Tanakh. So I want you to have a look, first of all, at this quotation from the book of Daniel, chapter 2. Just by way of introduction, it's interesting to note that, of course, Daniel, the book of Daniel is definitely a part of the Tanakh very much worth reading. Even if you can't manage all the Aramaic, at least read it in English. It's one of the things that strikes you straight away when you read the book of Daniel, or should strike you, is how similar it is to the story of Yosef HaTzadik that we are laning now in these Parshat Shavua. That Daniel, like Yosef, was abducted as a teenager and taken to a foreign court. And Daniel, like Yosef, interprets the dream of the emperor. And because he interprets the dream of the emperor, he becomes the most senior minister. Like Yosef becomes the most senior minister in Paro's court, Daniel becomes the most senior minister in Bovel, in Nebuchadnezzar's court. And in actual fact, like Yosef, Daniel spent his entire life living with the Goyim. He never actually rejoins living with Klal Yisrael. It's an astounding fact that. And Daniel similarly, Daniel lives in Bovel, and from one emperor to the next, he continues being their senior advisor. And these two individuals really represent a tremendous inner strength of people who are, and interesting, both of them begin their career by interpreting a dream that nobody else can interpret. And even if you look at the text in Daniel chapter 2, you will see words like Batipoem Rucho, literally words used, right, in the Chumash with Yosef are used with Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. And in both cases, they bring a Yeshua. So Daniel is working within the royal court of Nebuchadnezzar, and he's looking after Klal Yisrael in Golus. This is the first generation of the Jewish people who've been exiled from the land of Israel into Babel, and he looks after them. He makes sure that they're not destitute, make sure they're not persecuted. He cares for them in the same way as Yosef cares for his brothers in Mitzrayim. And it's very, very fascinating to see that that's a subject for a whole shiur, really. But I just want to touch upon it here, which is not my shiur for the moment. But here you do find that Daniel davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, please, let me have the wisdom to interpret the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. And when he gets the interpretation, a type of a Ruach HaKodesh, I hesitate to use the word Nevuah, because Daniel, actually, strictly speaking, is not part of the Nevi'im. He's in the Ksuvim, and he's not considered to be Daniel Hanavi, but he's certainly with Ruach HaKodesh, he certainly gets the interpretation, and with that interpretation, he is able to explain to Nebuchadnezzar about all the Golios and the role that he will play. But look at the phrase here that I've quoted for you, one pasuk from Daniel chapter 2. Ladies and gentlemen, have a look at your sheet for a minute. Underneath the line, so you understand the first half a dozen lines, the text of the Kaddish, which I'll be coming back to in a few minutes. But here he says, Honor Daniel v'Oma. So Daniel, in his tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says, Leheve shemei de'iloho muvorach min alma v'ad alma. The idea of Yehei Shmei Rabba Muvorach La'olam La'olmei Omaya, that phrase is borrowed from Daniel at a critical moment in his life where he needs to save his life and the life of his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, right? All his colleagues, they're all in danger, and he saves them by finding this interpretation. And he says, that the wisdom and power are his. So Daniel is giving us an expression of supreme recognition of the power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of Chachma and Gevurah. And there's no question that when Chazal authored this all-important line, it was an echo of Daniel, and for us it's meant to be a recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his him being the source of Chachma and Gevurah for Klal Yisrael. That's all I want to say about this at the moment. Maybe we have time to get back to it later on. The other phrase I want to mention here from the book of Yechezkel, where Yechezkel is talking about Achris Hayom, it's talking about Yemos HaMashiach, and he uses this phrase of Hiskadalti v'Hiskadashti. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he describes the state of affairs at Yemos HaMashiach, he says the result of the Gilui Shechina, the way in which Klal Yisrael will be saved in the Yemos HaMashiach, will create such a Kiddush Hashem, this Gadalti, this Kadashti, that I will be made great and holy. That even the nations of the world will come to understand the Ummos Ha'olam will come to recognize the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we have already in the sort of hardwired into the Kaddish, we have already two extremely powerful citations, one from Daniel and one from Yechezkel. With Yechezkel is referring more to the Yemos HaMashiach dimension, that really Kaddish is if you like, a tefillah, which contains a dimension to it, which is an anticipation of the Geula Acharon. And hence that's why in some nusach, they add in the Yatzmach Prikunei V'Korav Meshichei. That is a reference to that side of the Kaddish, which is Messianic, right? Nusach Ashkenaz doesn't say that, because Nusach Ashkenaz tries to keep away from references to the Messianism in our davening much more than Nusach Sfar does. That's also a separate subject for a different shiur. But we have here a tefillah authored by Chazal, which draws on these sources. One of the interesting aspects of the Kaddish is that really in the Shas Bavli that we have today, we don't have the full text of the Kaddish. All we have in the Shas Bavli is Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavorach La'olam La'ol Me'olam. That's what we have, right? The rest of the Kaddish was known, was said, it was known already in antiquity, but exactly when it was put together, we don't know precisely. But that line, so I gave you one example here in Barachas Daf Gimel, you can see towards the end of the first page, B'Shashi Yisrael Nichnosim L'Botik Nesiyas L'Botik Midrashas. So the Gemara there says, at the time that Klal Yisrael entered the shuls, V'onin Yehei Shemei HaGodol M'Vayrach, then when they say that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Menanei HaRosha V'omer Ashrei HaMelech Shemekal Zinosu V'Beis HaKach. This is a midrashic expression of the idea that in some sense, this gives HaKadosh Baruch Hu a feeling, an understanding that Klal Yisrael recognize the Gevura of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore the Chachamim put, so to speak, into the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ashrei HaMelech Shemekal Zinosu. How fortunate is the king, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, that I deserve, that I'm getting this type of acknowledgement and praise from Klal Yisrael. And as I say, the depth and the meaning of the praise has its roots both in Daniel and in Yechezkel. But there is here a very, very interesting, much more hidden theme that I'd like to touch upon. And let me just give you a little bit of an introduction to this. You know, we have in our davening, not many, but a few direct chunks of text from the Chumash. We have Kriyas Shema, which is directly from the Chumash, right? We have Oz Yoshir Moshe, directly from the Chumash. We have pieces of the text. And one of the big questions is, what happens to that text in the Chumash, which was the most important moment of connection between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, namely Har Sinai? What happened to the Aseret HaDibrot? And this is a very interesting theme. Why is the Aseret HaDibrot not in our daily tefillah? Now, in some Sidurim, you'll find Aseret HaDibrot after Aleinu and after Shir Shiv Yom stuck in at the very end, but that's not part of the tefillah, and it was a subject, it comes from the Sefer Rokeach, Rabbi Eliezer of Worms, in the 12th century. He suggested that we should put it in towards the end of the daven. The Arizal was very much against it. The Mukabolim very much were against saying the Aseret HaDibrot. It's a whole debate whether or not to mention the Aseret HaDibrot or not. What is the issue? And let me give you just an interesting illustration of this. Think about this for a minute. Shabbos morning Shachris. What do we say? Yismach Moshe, B'matnas Chelkoi. What are we talking about? Moshe Rabbeinu was B'simcha. Ki evanem kalil tiferes, Roshan Osatala, but under the Fanech al Har Sinai. What are we talking about? Moshe ben Har Sinai, and he gets a Shnei Luchos Abris, and of course of him Shmira Shabbos. So what do you expect now is going to happen? Should say, Zochos Yom Shabbos L'Kadshim. Of this introduction, you would have thought you'd get a quotation from the Aseret HaDibrot, instead of which we get B'Shamru B'nai Yisrael as a Shabbos from Kisisa. What happened? Moshe Rabbeinu, Yismach Moshe, standing there, he gets the Luchos, and he was so happy that he got the Luchos which contain Shabbos, right? And what is written? B'Shamru B'nai Yisrael as a Shabbos. In other words, Ad Kedei Kach, Chazal kept away from the Aseret HaDibrot, that even when it was the obviously relevant text to quote, they wouldn't quote it. What happened here? The question becomes even more amazing when you have a look in the Mishnayos, which deal with the activities of the Kohanim in the Bais Sheni, in the Bais Rishon and the early Bais Sheni, where clearly the Mishnah says explicitly that the Kohanim would say Kriya Shema, and they would say the Aseret HaDibrot. That was part of their general Seder Hayom of their tefillah. They didn't yet, in many cases, they didn't yet have the Shemona Esrei as we have it, but they had the Kriya Shema, and they had Aseret HaDibrot. So here comes a Gemara in Brachas Daf Yud Beis, where the Gemara deals with this question. And the Gemara says, we have decided, we being Chachamim, the Chazal, exactly at which point in history the decision was made, it's not entirely clear, but we'll see a little bit from the context. We have decided that we are going to delete Aseret HaDibrot from the Siddur. Why? And the language of the Gemara is Mipnei Taromet Haminim. Mipnei Taromet Haminim. Because of the fuss, if you like, or the objections, or the difficulties raised by the minim. Who are these minim? Okay, they can write a PhD. What do you say? Yes, so the Poshup Pshat is, these are the early Christians, and then the Yerushalmi adds in brachas to this thing, Taromet HaMinim, Shahayu Omrim, that these minim used to say that all that the Jewish people heard from HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the Aseret HaDibrot, and the rest, the Chachamim made up. The Chachamim what we call today Reform Judaism, right? Reform Judaism is the idea that indeed there was a moment of Har Sinai, but basically the Torah as we have it today was written later on by various different authors. Chas v'shalom is a denial of of Torah min Hashemayim, one of the Yesodei Hadat. And because the Torah is Hamini, because the Christians saw the Aseret HaDibrot as in some way being more important than all the other than the rest of the Torah, and if we were to cite the Aseret HaDibrot in our davening, they'd say, oh, you see, they only cite the Ikar, Pirshema, Aseret HaDibrot, and the rest they don't say. Therefore, Chazal decided no more Aseret HaDibrot in our davening ever. Right? So much so, in fact, there's an interesting tshuva on the Rambam. The Rambam in his Shilas and Tshuvas was asked the question, should one stand up for Kriyas HaTorah of the Aseret HaDibrot? And he said, absolutely not, says the Rambam. Please do not stand up for the Kriyas HaTorah of the Aseret HaDibrot, even though the minhag in most shuls is that we do stand up, right? And that's because we haven't read the Rambam. But the Rambam says very clearly, do not stand, the Vilna Gaon also writes, do not stand up for the Aseret HaDibrot, because by standing up, it could be misinterpreted as meaning that, oh, this was the Dvar Hashem. And the rest, okay, the rest somehow came to us through various inspired leadership. In other words, it opens the door for a denial of Torah min Hashemayim, and therefore Aseret HaDibrot was deleted from our daily davening. But here comes an interesting thing. The later Mefarshim, Abu Draham and other Mefarshim say that the Kaddish was written in a way that it contained within it a coded reference to the Aseret HaDibrot. That Klal Yisrael didn't want to abandon the Aseret HaDibrot completely. They didn't want to abandon it because Aseret HaDibrot was the greatest kesher between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, right? So what they did was they made a tefillah which wasn't at all about the Aseret HaDibrot, but in it there are a few coded messages, right, which are hidden away behind a lot of Aramaic words, right? But in order to, in some way, preserve our connection to the Aseret HaDibrot, and I'm going to tell you two of them. Two connections. There are more, but two connections are I find particularly interesting. First of all, the Gemara in Makkas Daf Kaf Gimel is a Gemara which gives us one of the very rare occasions where the Gemara itself gives us a gematria. We're accustomed to hearing gematrias left, right, and center, but most of our gematrias come from Hasidic Rebbes and Hasidic material of one sort or another. But there are one or two occasions where Chazal in the Gemara give us a gematria. So say Chazal in Makkas Daf Kaf Gimel Amud Beis, right? What the pasuk is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu taught us Torah. Says the Gemara, Torah is gematria. What's the gematria of Torah? Taf Vov Reish Yud 611. 611. Says the Gemara, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu taught us 611 mitzvahs. Ask the Gemara, wait a minute, what happened to the other two? What happened to the other two? They're not two, they're 613. Says the Gemara, the other two, we didn't meet Moshe Rabbeinu. The other two, Mipiha Gevura Shamu. They heard it directly in an unmediated way, directly from the Rebbeinu Shalom. So Torah, Tzivalon Moshe. Moshe transmitted to us the Dvar Hashem of 611, and the other two came from HaKadosh. This is actually, if you look at the Hebrew text of Aseret HaDibrot, you see very interestingly that the grammar of the first two of the Aseret HaDibrot is different to the rest of the Aseret HaDibrot. The first two are written in the first person. Or no chi, Hashem Elokecha, it's me, right? Lo yeh l'cha Elohim Hashem al ponai, right? But already in the third one, it says lo siso Shem Hashem Elokecha. It's the third. The third commandment isn't lo siso es shemi l'Hashem. It's lo siso Shem Hashem Elokecha l'Hashem. It's already in the third person, right? So this is a deal the Ramban brings down, Pashas Yisro. It says very meduik in the language. The first two dibros is HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking I, thou, directly one-to-one to Klal Yisrael. And from then on, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10 dibros, they are all transmitted by a third party, by Moshe Rabbeinu. Why is this interesting? So one of the interesting diukim here in the Kaddish is that, as we all know, the Kaddish is primarily written in Aramaic, right? And we today are not so familiar with Aramaic, but pay attention that there are in the Kaddish, there are 10 Hebrew words. There are 10 Hebrew words, and they're arranged in such a way that first there are two. Yiskadal, the Yiskadash is Hebrew. It's not Aramaic. Shmei Rabbah is already Aramaic. Ba'al Modibra Chirusa is already Aramaic, right? Yehei Shmei Rabbah and the Vorach Lam Rameh is Aramaic. But then Yisporach, Yishtabach, Yispor, Yisremon, Yisnaseh, Yishadav, Yishalev, Yishalol are 8 Hebrew words. So you have 10 Hebrew words buried in the Kaddish, divided up into two groups. There's 2 and 8. And that is the Aseret HaDibrot. The Aseret HaDibrot were given over in exactly that way. 2 directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and 8 from through Moshe Rabbeinu. And these are the Aseret, the 10 Hebrew words, which are in some way, as I say, symbolically, without it being in your face. I mean, most people who say Kaddish, their whole life, have never noticed this. But they know that the Kaddish is a bit of a jumble of Aramaic and Hebrew, but it's not a jumble at all. It's in Aramaic. Possibly it's in Aramaic because the Christians didn't understand Aramaic. I don't know why. But it's in Aramaic, but the 10 words representing Aseret HaDibrot are the Hebrew words in the Kaddish. So in actual fact, when one is saying Kaddish, if you have the right kavanah and you know what you're saying, you are in fact evoking that Kedusha of the Aseret HaDibrot of Har Sinai, which we would like to add into our tefillos because it's so fundamental to our kesher with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Chachamim forbade it for the reasons I mentioned before. And here comes another second connection, which I find particularly interesting, and this is in the Baal HaTurim. Baal HaTurim writes as follows, something very fascinating. So he says, there is in Chazal on numerous occasions a connection between Brias HaOlam and Matan Torah. Those two things are mentioned, are connected to each other in Chazal time and time again, in many different ways. For example, the beginning of the Medrash Rabbah, the beginning of Bereshis, gives us what appears at first sight to be an almost childish Medrash, but many many midrashim appear at first sight to be a bit childish, right? But that's just it's a form of literature that the Chachamim use to express really profound issues. So in the Midrash it says that Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, the Aleph, the letter Aleph, came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and complained. Lots of kids in primary school hear the story, right? The Aleph comes and complains and says, what do you mean? How can you start the Torah with a Beis? I'm the Aleph, right? I'm the first. How can you start with a Beis? And every adult, of course, understands straight away, this is not a cartoon, you understand what I mean? This is, the Chachamim are using a literary form of Midrash to express an important idea. But what is that important idea? Let's see what HaKadosh Baruch Hu's answer is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, anyone know what God's answer to the Aleph is? He says, don't worry. When I come at Har Sinai to give the Torah, I'll start with you. Anochi Hashem. That's the Midrash. Right? The Aleph, later on. So the Mepharshim explain what Chazal are telling us something very important. That even though the Bria Sa'olam, the creation of nature, happened in terms of sequence of events, it happened first, before Matan Torah. But actually, in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Matan Torah is the Aleph. Aleph and the Beis here don't mean first and second in terms of time sequence, but they mean primary and secondary. HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifested himself in this world on two occasions. Once was Matan Torah, and once was Bria Sa'olam. And this Midrash is telling us, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us that really Matan Torah was the Aleph. That was the Ikka. Right? And you can't give Torah to an empty world. You first, derech eretz, commemorate Torah, you've got to build up civilization, you've got to build up mankind. And then to mankind, you can give the Torah. So here we have a very interesting Midrash, and maybe what you know better is the very last Rashi in Bereshis chapter 1. The closing words of the Chumash of Bereshis chapter 1 is something we say every Friday night. Yom Hashishi. That's it. That's the end of chapter 1. And Vaychulu Hashmayim Ba'aretz is already chapter 2. Okay? So says Rashi, why Yom Hashishi? It didn't say Vayerav Yom Ha'echod or Yom Hashemi or Yom Hashlishi. All the way through it says Vayerav Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. It should also say here Vayerav Yom Shishi. Why Yom Hashishi? That's Rashi's kasha, quoting the Midrash. And the answer that Rashi gives is connected to this idea that really, says Rashi, that Kol ha'olam kulu, the entire cosmos, with all the galaxies and all the natural forces and the oceans and the animals and everything, was all created, says Rashi, al tanai. The world was created on probation, right? That al tanai, that at some later date, Klal Yisrael would accept the Torah. Says Rashi, Yom HaShishi is a reference to the 6th day of Sivan, of Matan Torah, of Shavuos. That's what Rashi says. Yom HaShishi, that in other words, that the whole Bria was only ratified, the Mafreya, at Matan Torah. That Matan Torah was the purpose for which the Bria was created. So the whole Bria, until the moment of Har Sinai, was actually without any tachlis, without any purpose. Once Klal Yisrael accepted the Torah, then it was Yom HaShishi. I think the language of Rashi there is Kol ha'olam kuloi tolui v'omed. It was like, how would you translate tolui v'omed? Hanging in the balance. In other words, would it be justified? What's the purpose of this world? Is the purpose of this world just that things should exist in order that they should exist? That people should live because they want to live? No, they should live for a higher purpose, and that higher purpose only came into this world at Matan Torah. So Rashi says, so you see in several places in Chazal, this link between Matan Torah and Bria Sa'olam. Says the Baal HaTurim the following idea. Pay attention, says the Baal HaTurim. Again, we're dealing with a very close reading and an attempt by Chazal to hide something in the Kaddish. Okay? So he says about it to pay attention. The first pasuk in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz, right, is a pasuk with 7 words and 28 letters. Right? And these 28 letters, in fact, there's a remez in the first Rashi of Koyach Masav Higid La'amo. Rashi brings down that pasuk in Tehillim, that koyach is the 28 letters of that first pasuk. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz. 7 words and 28 letters. That is the opening pasuk. Says the Baal HaTurim, there's another pasuk in the Torah which has 7 words and 28 letters. What is that? Vayidaber Elokim eis kol hadvorim ha'ele leima. The introductory pasuk in Shemos chapter 20, the introductory pasuk to Matan Torah also has 7 words and 28 letters in order to bring about if you like, a structural similarity between the introduction to Brias Olam and the introduction to Matan Torah. Why? Because Chazal understood that they are thematically connected. And then the Baal HaTurim continues and he says, and that's why when Klal Yisrael came to write the Kaddish, the whole Kaddish is centered around the text, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavorach La'olam La'olmei Olmaya. 7 words and 28 letters. These 7 words and 28 letters are meant to evoke both Matan Torah and Brias Olam and the Kesher between. That the world only, that Ba'almo Divrach Chirusei, that it's a world that was created. What's Kirusei mean? It means for the Rotzen Hashem. It's the Rotzen Hashem that the world should come into being. The world did not need to come into being. The world did not exist forever. It only came into being because of Vayom Elokim Yihior. It was the Rotzen Hashem. Ba'almo Divrach Chirusei, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted the world to exist, and it wanted it to have the purpose of Matan Torah. These 2 events, Matan Torah and Brias Olam, are hinted at in this one pasuk, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavorach La'olam La'olmei. This is, I think, a very fascinating, a deeper insight to diukim in the Kaddish, both of which are designed to evoke the Aseret HaDibrot, both the 10 Hebrew words arranged first 2 and then 8, like the Dibros, and the structure of the 7 words and 28. Why 7 words and 28 letters? Baal HaTurim's got a parish in that as well. I won't go into that for the moment. But it's very interesting to see that there was definitely an agenda here in the Kaddish to try and not lose completely a connection with Matan Torah when we're standing for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Tefillah. When we look at the words Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavorach La'olam La'olmei, you can see the top of your page, right in line 3 in heavy type of the Kaddish. Incidentally, the Kaddish that we have here at the top of your sheet is often wrongly called Chatzi Kaddish. This is not, in fact, Chatzi Kaddish. This is Kaddish, right? The other Kaddishim were much later additions. The Kaddish Yosem, which adds Yehei Shlomo Rabbah, and the Kaddish Drabanan, Al Yisrael Rabbanan. These were much later additions to the Kaddish, but the original Kaddish is this. This is not Chatzi Kaddish. This is the core Kaddish. This is it. The whole Kaddish is only these few lines, right? And that is the essence of the tefillah. Why it's got to do with an ovel? Why should an ovel say Kaddish is not entirely clear. There's nothing in the text which has a direct reference, lichora, to somebody in Avelis, except for one thing. And this I've seen in the Mefarshim, and I heard it once from one of my Rabbeim, Rav Shlomo Goldberg, gave a whole shiur on this, is this phrase, Ba'alma Divrach Chirusei, a world that was created according to the Ratzon Hashem. And this is a moment of Tziduk Hadin. They're saying the patira of this loved person is something which is painful, which we don't understand why he or she had to leave us. We don't understand it at all. But Hashem Nasan, Hashem Lokach. And what is that? That's Ba'alma Divrach Chirusei, a world that was created according to the Ratzon Hashem. He wanted this person to live in this world and wanted this person to live only a limited amount of time. Why? That's the Ratzon Hashem. And guess what? The whole world only came into existence for the Ratzon Hashem. In other words, it's not, HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't answerable to us. We're answerable to him. He's not answerable to us. I remember on that line at the very, very sad occasions. You all remember when these 3 boys were abducted. Remember, they found Nebuch to be killed. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy. We want to be davening for them for days and days. And the mother of one of the boys was interviewed by a particularly impolite and hard-hearted Israeli interviewer who said, okay, after the boy was found dead, he asked her, "No, do you have any, we all be davening for him and it didn't work. Do you have any complaints to the Almighty? Do you have any complaints to God?" He asked this mother. So she said, "Complaints to God?" And here she used the Ivrit phrase. She said, "I don't have any complaints to God. Ani ovedet etzlo, hu lo oved etzli." It's a very interesting line, I thought. Ani ovedet etzlo, I'm working for him. He's not working for me. If an employee comes late, then he's answerable to the boss. If the boss comes late, the boss is not answerable to the employees. In other words, Ani ovedet etzlo, I'm one of his workers. I don't have any kashas on the boss, right? He doesn't work for me. And that's what we're saying really about Modiin, a world that was created according to the Ratzon Hashem. And that's the connection to the Aved. So here we have a very multifaceted, beautiful tefillah, drawing on Daniel, drawing on Yechezkel, right? And at the same time, bringing to us this theme in Chazal that both Brias HaOlam and Matan Torah were really at the heart of the Ratzon Hashem in the creation of the world. If you turn over your sheet just for a minute, so you'll see at the top there's a Rashi, and then there's a Tosfos. So there's this Tosfos, right? This Tosfos in Barachos Daf Gimel Amud Aleph on the word Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavorach. So Tosfos quotes a Machzor Vitri. Okay, Machzor Vitri was written by Talmidei Rashi. Machzor Vitri was one of the earliest Sidurim that we've got. We tend to call a Siddur the daily davening and a Machzor the Yontif davening. The actual fact that we're shown in called the Siddur the Machzor. The Machzor was the regular tefillas that was said regularly. And Machzor Vitri was the name of a town in France, and where the Talmidim of Rashi were living, and they collated all Rashi's ideas about the Nusach HaTfilah, and the Machzor Vitri is very interesting. So it says there, have a look at this text. Machzor Vitri, Yehei Shmei Rabba, Shezu Tfilah Sh'onu Mispalelin. What is the meaning of this tefillah? I can see I've only got a few minutes left, so let me just finish up here. Shimalei Shemoi, that the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu should become Maleh. In other words, we're living in a world where the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Chaser. The name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not full. Why is it not full? Because he's not recognized fully by most people. And what pasuk is cited here? KSYM, and the second line of Tosfos, Ki Yod al Case Yod. Right? Anyone know where that pasuk is written? That pasuk is the closing pasuk of B'Shalach. We're talking about the battle against Amalek. So there it says, I think I brought the pasuk. Yes, I brought the pasuk. If you turn back to page 1, and the very last line of page 1, Vayomer ki yod al kes yod nilchama la'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. Right, the battle against Amalek, which is in every generation. Amalek raises his ugly head in every generation in different forms. This is not only a milchama against Klal Yisrael, it's a milchama l'Hashem. It's deeply motivated by people who can't bear the idea that there is an Am Hashem. And here it says, Al Case Yod. In other words, the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the whole Chumash is never written Yud Hey. It's always written Yud Kei Vav Kei, or Elokim, or Aleph Daled Nun Yud, right? To use Yud Hey as a name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the Tehillim, we've had Hallelujah, right? But Yud Hey is never used, but here it is, the one and only time. So if you have to turn over the page to page 2, at the top line of page 2, Rashi says, Umahu case, nema kisei. Why does it say case, kaf samach, instead of kisei, which means the chair, the throne? And also the name of God is only half. Nishba HaKadosh Baruch. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu swore, reading Rashi here at the top of page 2, she'ein shemo sholem, ve'ein kisei sholem, ad she'yamacheh shemo shel Amalek kula. That what we're davening for is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should remove Amalek, and by doing that, the Shem Hashem will become Molech. Says the Machzor Vitri, if you go back now to the Machzor Vitri and Tosfos on page 2, so it says that Yehei Shemei Rabbah should be understood as follows. Yehei, that the word Shemei, which is written Shin Mem Yud Hey, right, is meant to be understood as two words. Shem Yud Hey. Yehei Shem Yud Hey Rabbah. That the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is currently only Yud Hey. Why? Because of the presence of Amalek and all other militant anti-Semites and atheists in the world, they darken the Shem Hashem. So the Shem Hashem is not Molech, it's Chosek. And therefore it's only Yud Hey. So he says, we're davening Yehei Shemei Rabbah. That the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu should become complete. So that's what he says here. Yehei Shemo Shalom, Bekiseh Shalom, Ad Shimocha Zar Shem Amalek, or Perish Kach, Yehei Shemei, Shem Yud Hey Rabbah, Kalomish on Espalim, Shei Shema, God of Shalom, Baruch Olam. Right, okay, that's something else. Okay, so basically, just to sum up for a minute, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of some of the deeper ideas which are hardwired into our Kaddish. Our Kaddish wants us to understand that, like Doniel, we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the source of all Chachma and all Gevurah, and that is the immense Kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that, like Yechezkel, we are looking forward to V'niskadashti, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name will be revered worldwide by all the Umas Olam. At the same time, the Yehei Shemei Rabbah contains within it a code that the Aseret HaDibrot is still with us in a coded form. We don't want to say it explicitly because it's open to misuse and misunderstanding. But the Kedusha of Har Sinai and the Aseret HaDibrot is still in our tefillos. And when an Ovel says Kaddish, it has a special meaning, right? And the mitzvah of saying Kaddish is an immense mitzvah. Right? It's a mitzvah which, according to Chazal, is a tremendous benefit both for the person saying it and for the nifter, the person who's passed away, that one of their family is being Mekadesh Shemo B'Rabim, is speaking about the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu becoming complete. That is the greatest possible zechus imaginable. And that's really all I have time for this evening. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about the Kaddish. Ilui Nishmas, Rabbi Mordechai ben Elazar, Rabbi Mordechai ben Elazar, who was a most remarkable Talmud Chacham and a mensch, and who appreciated the depth of tefillah. Tefillah was one of the things that meant a lot to him, and the deeper understandings and the ramazim in tefillah was something that he really lived with, and when he davened, he was completely focused on his tefillah. And I'm quite sure that Ba'olam ha'emes, in some way, he's also davening for all of us, especially for his family, for his wife, and for children and grandchildren. And Bez Hashem, we should get together in good health for many years to come to learn Torah together in the memory of this great man. Thank you very much.